Right, so hello, greetings. It's Dr. Thomas Daffern. Yes, hello, it's the 5th of December. And this is my, what is going to be now my monthly talk. For the last 2 years, I've been doing a weekly talk every Sunday. Started out against Brexit. Some of you may have heard some of my early talks. I felt very strongly, I still feel strongly, that Brexit was the worst foreign policy decision made by my country, UK, during my entire lifetime. And I will oppose it till it's reversed. And I've been fasting every Sunday ever since, and I will continue to do that till the situation is resolved. But, I've decided to make these talks every month now because I'm extremely busy doing other things as well. I'm writing all the time. I've written about 20 books since I moved here to France, and I'm busy, on a couple at the moment I'm working on. 3 actually. So I'm a busy writer, and I'm also going to be teaching some courses coming up in the new year. So I'm going to do this once a month, and it'll be on every Sunday at monthly intervals. So this is the 5th of December. The next one will be, first Sunday in January. So it's a sort of, roundup of what I think's been happening the last month. It's a month since I last did this recording, which was in November. The world is going through a very turbulent and crazy time. Not just because of Brexit, but, on top of that, we have the pandemic, we have all kinds of other problems. I still think Brexit was the sort of the kickstarter for this whole cycle of chaos that we're living through. And I lament the fact that so many of my countrymen voted for it without knowing what they were doing, in my opinion. I know some people that voted for Brexit, and I think that they surely have by now come to their senses, but, we're living through ridiculous times. Today is the 5th of December, it's the day of Saint Saba, who was a Palestinian hermit saint in Jerusalem in the 5th century, one of the very first great Christians of Palestine, famous, celebrated throughout the Universal Church. So I honour his memory today. In my calendar of saints and sages, which is an interfaith thing, today we celebrate Judah, who also is the person that gave his name to Judaism, which is really, it's misnamed because it's not, that religion is not just the religion of Judah, who was the son of Jacob. It's the religion of Jacob himself, who became called Israel, and it's the religion of, Abraham, who was the ancestor of Jacob. So, I mean, if we had any clarity in religious nomenclature, the name Judaism would be redone. It should be called something else. And Judah himself wasn't a particularly pleasant man. If you read Genesis, he was not a very nice man. So, I don't think one would use him as an exemplary of ethics and morality and call a religion after him. That would be a bit crazy, in my opinion. But hey, it's the name we're stuck with. And so part of the charm, if that's the right word, of Genesis is that it tells real human stories about very real human people. The fact that Judah isn't perfect, compared to Joseph, his brother, he was a bit of a charlatan, and he actually helped sell him into slavery. But that's the point, isn't it? That these people are not all saints. I mean, they're real, like you and me, complete with foibles and awkward traits and so on. So, we could call Judaism, we could call it like real realityism. and if we can, redeem it, as Christ tried to do, and many of the great Kabbalist saints ever since, then we're redeeming reality itself, because it's like normal peopleism. Discuss, anyway, I just share that for what it's worth. That's my take on today. Right, so what have I been up to in the last month? Okay, so I've been very busy working on my Tarot of the Gods because I'm an interfaith specialist, an expert in world religions, history of ideas and peacemaking. So I've decided to do a tarot with all the main gods in. It's never been attempted before. There's millions of tarot. I have loads of them from different traditions. I have a Buddhist tarot, American Indian, Druid, and so on, which have their pantheons in. And then I have goddess tarots, which there's quite a few of those, but nobody's done a god's tarot, which is what I'm working on. And it's very interesting working through each of the major gods. Since we last met last month, I've done quite a few, and I want to share with you three, perhaps. The first one is Sin, the moon god, who was the moon god of, originally, Sumeria. He was called Nana, and he had a very important temple in Ur. The chief priestess of that temple was like the Archbishop of Canterbury to the Sumerians, really, really important. It was the top job. And we know that Sargon appointed his daughter to that role as chief priestess of the moon god at Ur, which was down in southern Mesopotamia. And that was a very important city, and it was dedicated to the moon god. He was the top god. Now, but Ur was not the only place. It was twinned with a place in northern Mesopotamia called Haran, which was way up. It's now in what is southern Turkey, actually. Still between the rivers Tigris and Euphrates, so it counts as Mesopotamia. And it was twinned intellectually and spiritually with because they both worshipped Sin, the moon god. And in Haran there were a very famous moon temple from ancient times. Archaeologists have discovered it. And we know that that moon worship of Sin carried on way, way into even historical times, because Haran was famous for its Sabaeans. When the Muslims turned up with their army, they were still pagans worshipping Sin, the moon god. And the Muslims left them alone because they said to them, look, we worship the Sabaean tradition of the Hermetic Scriptures. They had a copy of the Hermetic Scriptures and were able to convince the Muslims, look, leave us alone, we're mentioned as people of the book. And the people of Haran carried on with that tradition, and a colleague of mine has written a whole book about the Hermetic traditions in Islam, which is, the most important scholarly study done in the Western world. More needs to be done about this, and what text did they actually have? Did they have all of the Hermetic Scriptures that we got in Florence later, that were translated into Latin, and so on and so on. But the point is that Sin was being worshipped up there. And the moon god was really important. I mean, when you finally when this is published, I think this work is going to be a bit of a bombshell theologically, because I'm trying to show the interconnection of all these different gods. Sin, the moon god, was definitely connected to Abraham and his worldview, because Abraham came from Ur, and he ends up in Haran, and he had family relations with Haran. There is a tradition that the Ur that Abraham came from was up in close to Haran. It's now called Sanlerfa. Maimonides, whose work I greatly respect, one of the greatest Jewish philosophers of all time, said, look, hey, Abraham was born up there in the northern Mesopotamian region, and if you go to Sanlerfa now, you're shown a cave where they say, the Muslim guys will tell you that's where Abraham was born, and in Islamic thought that was always agreed. So I suspend judgment. It is possible that Abraham was born up there. It makes more sense because it's close to Haran, and we know that he went to Haran. But basically, Abraham was born into a family that would have worshipped Sin, the moon god. And although traditionally he's made a kind of, a recalcitrant anti-pagan fanatic, smashing his father's statues and so on. I think that's probably a retrospective projection back. I believe that Abraham was a reforming intellectual pagan who probably saw sin as the deity that he worshipped, this moon god, as his spiritual overlord, so to speak. There's clues in the Bible that this is the case, and scholars have gone through it, and a lot of his family, Terah, and the people mentioned in Genesis, all have names connected with the moon. Levana and Laban, or Laban, meaning white, or the moon. These were moon worshipping people, but that wasn't seen as odd. That was the chief deity for the entire Mesopotamian region. There were great temples to the moon, not just in Ur and Haran, but also in Mari, which was another great city not far away. In Babylon, in all the other great centres. And so I've been researching this in great detail. It's absolutely fascinating. Discovering, for instance, Leonard Woolley, who excavated in my parents' generation, he found a text, a tablet, which shows the moon overwatching the tree of life and a sort of Adam and Eve figure celebrating the fruit of the tree of life in a positive way, not in a negative way. I think what happened with the Genesis scriptures is it was ideas that were jumbled up and taken from Mesopotamia in a way that was to recreate a narrative, but distorted the original stories to some extent. So, discuss. I mean, the serpent in the sin stories of Babylon and Mesopotamia was a positive figure who celebrated male sexuality and the phallic principle of life that gives life to all things. I mean, the serpent was esteemed in that culture as part of the story. And in the Leonard Woolley discoveries, it's the serpent who protects the tree of life and guarantees the fertility of the garden, along with the moon god and his goddess, because the moon god had a moon goddess. And they stood for the life principle. They were helping the garden. Now, so the distortion that's in Genesis, where these become evil figures, is, I think, lamentable. I suspend judgment, and I think it's something that scholars ought to look into more. I've always thought there should be a scholarly version of the Bible text done with showing the parallel pagan sources for all the Genesis stories. The Noah story that we know was taken from Epishtim, the Garden of Eden story that's taken from these ancient stories and so on, and the creation story itself. Again, there are texts in the cuneiform tablets that we've discovered over the last 100 years that give the source for a lot of these stories, and I can see in my mind's eye a sort of parallel Bible where you have the the official version of the Genesis text that we have, and then the original sources. And I think it should have footnotes. I'd love to see a great scholarly team come together and do this. Anyone wants to help, get in touch, because it's ridiculous it hasn't been done. I mean, for God's sake, what are we doing here? Are scholars all fallen asleep? It needs to be done, because these are the sources of that biblical text, and either we think they are sacred and important, in which case surely we should study their sources in detail and find out the latest scholarly research on them, or just, what are we doing? Are scholars all taken a sleep pill or something? Anyway, that's just one god I've been doing. I've done also Prometheus since we last met. Now, Prometheus and I have a close relationship. I've always loved Prometheus. I was brought up in a Marxist family as a boy, and I discovered early on that Marx said Prometheus is the patron saint of all philosophers. I mused about that. Well, what's he talking about, And when I read classics and I studied, I understood what he was talking about, because Prometheus brought fire to mankind, and he was a protector of humanity. And the more research you do on Prometheus, I think the more he shines, because he was a titan, and he was the son of either Themis or Gaia, who were Titanesses. This was an older generation than the Olympian gods. And I've got, a great respect for the Titans because one of my favourites was Mnemosyne, who was the mother of the Nine Muses. So the Nine Muses, my Museum of the Muses, are named after daughters of Mnemosyne. And Plato's Academy had a devotion to the Nine Muses, which is what inspired me. I've discovered something very interesting doing this research, that there was an altar in the grounds of the Academy, which I've been to in Athens, where Plato taught and founded the original Academy. It had an altar to Prometheus and Athena and Hephaestus. But the Prometheus thing is the interesting one for me. And that's where this great race took place, a torch-lit race, during the great games in honour of Athena every year in Athens. And athletes would start at this altar to Prometheus in the grounds of the Academy. And then, run all around Athens and then come back and the winner won. I mean, and got the laurel wreath. I mean, what I don't know, and if anyone can find out, let me know, whether that altar to Prometheus was put in the grounds of the Academy after Plato had founded his school there, about 399 or 387 BC, I think. Was it after that? Or was it before? I think it was before, in which case, was that why Plato founded his academy at the site of this altar? I'd love to know if archaeologists have identified the exact whereabouts of the altar and whether it's been found, or I can't see anything in my sources on that. I'd love to know, because it was Athens that particularly celebrated Prometheus. Other city-states didn't really. They did a bit, but not to the extent of Athens. Why? Well, because Athens was dedicated to learning and knowledge, and that's where the philosophers congregated. That's where Socrates taught and Plato and so on. It's where the academy was founded. You see, Prometheus didn't just bring fire to mankind. He brought learning and knowledge, and he was an educator. Another great Athenian who wrote about Prometheus was Aeschylus, who did a tragedy called Prometheus Bound, which is one of the great plays of antiquity. And this was written and performed before Plato founded his academy. And it tells a very sad story of how Prometheus helped mankind, gave us fire, taught us, gave us the sciences, and protected us when Zeus, the sort of tyrannical Olympian deity who thought he was the top god, wanted to destroy humanity. It was Prometheus that actually saved us by arguing with Zeus, no, you can't destroy mankind. And so the Athenians felt that we owed an awful lot to Prometheus, which I think is true. I'm an honorary Athenian, so to speak. And it's interesting that Aeschylus and Plato both went to the Mysteries outside of Athens at Eleusis. I've also been there, but the Mysteries aren't functioning anymore. We have to reinvent them, restart them. I yearn to live in a world of peace where we can restart the Mysteries at Eleusis and rebuild the site and actually have it functioning again. Wouldn't that be nice, and the other mysteries, the Druid Mysteries at Avebury and Stonehenge and so on, I want them refounded. They survive, but underground. But we live in a world devoted to the destruction of the mysteries, the destruction of people of wisdom, the killing of sages, the martyrdom of saints. We live in a bonkers upside-down world where forces of darkness hunt down people who hold wisdom and knowledge. I'm with Pericles, who helped Athens in its heyday of learning and was a patron to Plato and the early intellectuals of Athens, and who he was also a patron of the mysteries at Eleusis and helped, and he himself was an initiate. Any Athenian intellectual of substance had to do the mysteries, and so Plato did as well, and we owe to Plato's writings a great deal of information about Prometheus, as well as to Aeschylus. So I recommend you to read those things. I've used them in my Tower of the Gods. I discovered something very interesting. I've always known Prometheus was the patron saint, not just of philosophers in general, but particularly of romantic philosophers, emerging out of the Enlightenment. You see, I see the Enlightenment period, Kant and co., continuing on into the Romantic period. I don't think one is opposed to the other. The true enlightened sage was a romantic because they're all devoted to the bringing back of knowledge. And Francis Bacon, the kickstarter of the scientific method, who's one of my intellectual heroes, wrote an essay on Prometheus, which I've included in my book, and which he describes Prometheus as the reviver of the torch-lit races in his honour. Bacon uses an analogy and says this is the scientific method, because each scholar or sage or thinker or scientist can only take the torch on so far, and then you hand it on to the next runner. You know, I've lived a certain number of years, I hope to live a bit longer, I've written some books, I'm running my torchlit race, and Bacon said the important thing is not to let the torch go out and to then successfully pass it on. That's what science is. You know, in my doctoral work and my postdoctoral work, I've tried to explain how history is not just about dynasties and battles and wars and power politics. It's about ideas, thoughts, visions, transpersonal realities, psychology. It's about spirituality, and that we need to study this scientifically. So I'm carrying that torch for humanity, protecting that knowledge from, you know, the kind of ignorance that wants to blow it out and so on. And then I will pass it on to anyone that is worthy of taking it on to the next step. Now that's what Bacon says science is. And he said it's the restarting of the Promethean races. I mean, Bacon was a Promethean. And so are all scientists by definition, because they're trying to bring knowledge to the next step of awareness. But that is a romantic project in the best sense of the term. It's a romance. The great scientists are in love with knowledge. People like Newton or Kepler or Leibniz or, you know, any of the great scientists of history are trying to take that knowledge on further to the next station. And that is a romantic project. And Freemasonry was part of that. Bacon is accredited with helping, you know, Freemasonry, which revived the mysteries in his time in the end 16th and early 17th centuries in London. I've been to Canterbury Tower where, you know, he did some of this work, and it's important because the mysteries also were revived at that time in the early Enlightenment period, and Freemasonry is part of that torchlit race, so to speak. If you think of the work of Freemasonry in Paris at the Lodge of the Nine Sisters, they were all great scientists. They were the founders of modern economics like Quenet. They were the founders of modern chemistry like Lavoisier, and the founders of, you know, many of the astronomy and mathematics and many of these great things, because they knew that science is part of the revelation of the mysteries. It's the work we do for Prometheus. To say thank you for saving humanity, right? Without him, we wouldn't be here. It's that spark of, I want to know the truth, absolute truth, not just be palmed off with nonsense. That's the Promethean spark in man. That's what Marx meant by saying that. I mean, what he was trying to do was find the truth of class warfare, the truth of economic poverty, the truth of why the capitalist system privileges a few and condemns the many to poverty and horrendous living conditions that he documented in Das Kapital with Engels. I mean, in those days of 19th century capitalism, it was horrendous what the poor were going through. Well, it still is in many parts of the world. That's why Marx, you know, invoked Prometheus to help him, as a social scientist, find the cause and the cure. Unfortunately, Marx didn't complete his work. He didn't live long enough. He never even finished working on Das Kapital, let alone, you know, volume 2 of the Irv, which would have been the solution to capital. You know, we're still at the foothills of that particular race. I'm trying in my own commentary on Das Kapital to sort of explain some aspects of where we need to go to develop that as a social science, a critique of what I call military capitalism, because Marx left out militarism. He never even mentioned the link between modern technology and militarism. He couldn't have foreseen it, you know. He at best, actually Marx was a romantic poet who dabbled in economics and didn't really, he was a useless communicator. He couldn't write properly, he didn't know how to explain himself. It all comes out in turgid sort of fake Hegelian rhetoric, which actually, you know, is pretty undigestible. So in my commentary I'm trying to explain what he was actually trying to say. But I honour him, you know. My mother was a Marxist, she taught me to respect the good bits. But that doesn't mean that as scholars we don't take the torch and then run with it, and that means we then have to transform it and make it useful light and useful heat. And so, I've also been working on Horus, the god, who is pretty powerful and important god, who is the falcon god, who soars into the Empyrean, who was the god of the pharaohs, and who was a pretty awesome, you know, deity. And that led me down some very interesting routes of travel because, you know, Crowley and the Thelemites all say we now live in the age of Horus, the eon of Horus. I mean, Crowley had an interesting cosmology of history. He thought that the first era of history is the matriarchal period, when everyone worships some other goddess, Isis. And we've done that, you know, we did that for centuries, millennia actually, in the old Neolithic. Everyone loved their mother goddesses. Then we grew up and we started worshipping Osiris, who's the male, the patriarch, the king of justice, and that was the time Christianity and the sort of patriarchal period of Judaism and Islam and all these male sort of oriented deities. And we went through that for a couple of thousand years, and now we're coming to the age of Horus, who's the sun, who reconciles the male and female, who is the ascended master of the mysteries. And Crowley got his sacred text, the Book of the Law, transmitted by an angel called Iwas, who was in fact a scribe to Horus. And Crowley believed he was the reincarnation of an ancient Egyptian priest of Horus. He thinks he knows who it was. And he was trying to bring that back now for us in the 20th or 21st century now. And we're supposed to live happily ever after in the eon of Horus. It's, you know, it's a worldview, and there are Thelemites around that swear by this. It's interesting, and I've gone into it in my cards, tarot, because of course Crowley also did a very interesting tarot deck. You know, his claim to be a reborn Egyptian priest, I mean, of Horus is probably true. You know, I suspend judgment. Why not? But does that make Horus the only, or the only god? No, I don't think so. The point of my Tarot of the Gods is that all these gods are important. You know, we might as well say we live in the eon of Prometheus, or the eon of you know, sin, or whatever, or the eon of Yahweh, or the eon of Ganesh, who's another deity I've just done. And Ganesh is also pretty awesome. You know, what I'm saying, I think, is that what we need to do as a humanity is honour and revere all these gods, all the archetypes of all, both male and female, from all of history, and I'm just concentrating on the male because they've been neglected in my opinion, and find a way to mediate between them all. You know, what about the Shinto deities, or the Polynesian, or the African? I've got them all in the Tarot of the Gods as well, because I think they're all sacred. And we shouldn't have to choose, like, my God is better than yours. You know, no. It's, you know, if you look at the shape of the globe, the Earth, we're all equidistant from the centre, wherever we are, in Australia, Africa, China, Greece, you know, and we all have access to the mysteries, equidistant from God. That's what Plotinus said, and Nicholas of Cusa. It's not like, I'm closer than you are. No, we're all equidistant from the heaven worlds and the Earth's centre. And so therefore we need to grow up and learn to revere and respect each other's cultures, each other's religions, each other's deities. And that's what is, you know, motivating me. I just want to say one other thing about Prometheus. I discovered something really interesting because I've always respected classical music. I'm a sort of composer and performer myself. anyone with a spare piano, please drop it off here in Beautet. My piano's stuck up in the castle in Scotland. Feel free to drive over and bring it down. So I discovered something. I've always loved Beethoven. He's one of to die for. And he was very Promethean in his music and what he did for music. I've always respected Beethoven's work, amazing man. Well, I discovered something very interesting. He wrote a ballet about Prometheus. I can't believe it. It's the longest held secret of classical music. Did you know Beethoven did a ballet about Prometheus? I didn't. And I know quite a lot about musicology. And here I discovered it. It was first performed in 1805 in Vienna, and then, incredibly, in 1806 in New York. It was the first of Beethoven's pieces ever performed in the Americas. And it's to die for, as in it's a allegory about Prometheus teaching mankind, bringing knowledge, and all the dancers include the muses, like Calliope and Erato and so on. And they bring to mankind the wisdom and knowledge. Now, this is a very Masonic ballet, and Beethoven was a Mason, along with Mozart and Haydn. And I think in that Prometheus ballet, he put a lot of sort of sacred teachings. And I'd love to see it performed, fully revived. If a ballet company gets in touch with me, I will help with I'll write the program notes. We need to get it done and maybe New York's the place, because that's where it was performed, or Vienna, I don't care. Because that would honour Prometheus and honour Beethoven. And it would show that mankind is ready to worship again the source of the muses, instead of fighting over who's got more enlightenment than who than the other guy. No, we're all co-enlightened or we're not, which was the point of Mahayana teaching. We either get there together or we fail individually. And that's why I'm going to be teaching a course on enlightenments with a friend of mine shortly in the new year. Because I think that's the point of what these great seers and sages have been trying to do, is bring us to a place of planetary enlightenment. So we're not competing, God forbid, and fighting wars over who's the more enlightened culture. Is it Britain or France? What nonsense. Britain and France are both fairly enlightened countries. They should be in one European Union. In my opinion, that's why I utterly oppose Brexit, because it was bad faith on the part of these pseudo-British American intellectuals who hijacked my country and turned us into rabid anti-Europeans. It never went down with the people. It was an elitist conspiracy of ignorance by stupid people for their own egotistical and selfish economic advancement. And we rejected the people of Britain. We know we're Europeans. We love Beethoven. We love Prometheus. And we want to be part of the Delphic Games revival, etc., etc. Okay, I want to move on and say that I've also been busy this last month working on a very detailed, interesting commentary on the Hermetic Scriptures, which, if you know your stuff, you'll know all about the Hermetic texts. You'll have read them or listened to my works on them. I've been recording a commentary on the Kore Kosmou, which means the Virgin of the World, Virgin of the Cosmos. And it's a dialogue between Isis, the goddess, and Horus. So it's relevant to the god Horus and Crowley's, anthropology of theology. I don't agree that one supersedes the other. I think we worship Isis and Osiris and Horus all at the same time. I think the archetypes are they're like energy fields that coexist simultaneously. So this dialogue between Isis and Horus is about creation, about how the world came to be. It's one of the lesser known texts of the Hermetic Scriptures.